Have all of you been enjoying this ongoing election cycle? You just having a good time with it? You love all that? You know, if you missed any of your politicians' favorite speeches, they're likely rerunning them on the Comedy Channel. So, you can watch that. Don't miss out on anything. And it's important to be, well informed. Now, before you think I'm being a smart aleck, I wanted to take a look here at Psalm 2. Psalm 2. This is Psalm 2 beginning in verse 1. It says this: Why do the nations rebel and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth take their stand and the rulers conspire together against the Lord and his anointed one. Let us tear off their chains and free ourselves from their restraints. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord ridicules them. I'm going to tell you from the beginning of man's rebellion against God, people have been coming up with their plans. Politicians have been making speeches, and kings have had their plans and rules and what they intended to do, and I'll tell you, God laughs. Mankind has been saying for thousands of years, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to fix all the world's problems. This is how we're going to run things. And God laughs. He laughs. Why? Because he has his plan. And guess what? His plan is the one that's going to happen. His plan is the one that's going to happen, not our plans. And so that's an important thing for us to keep in mind as we do it. Because the truth is the world's rulers are always making plans and promises and agendas. And the thing I've discovered is God knows what's coming tomorrow and we don't. We don't know. Our rulers don't know. Our leaders don't know what God does. He is in control. And God sits in heaven, I think, and sometimes he must just get a chuckle out of our plans. You ever think God laughs at you? I bet he does. I'm sure he laughs at me. I have my plans on how I'm going to get everything done. God says, oh, just wait. You think so? If you don't think so, watch children sometime and see their plans and what they're thinking. You can even see it sometimes in their mind where they're planning to do something. That's a lot of times the way we are. I think to God, he sees ahead what we're doing, and he laughs because he knows what will work and what won't work. And God has a plan for what's going to happen here on earth. In fact, you may not be aware of this, but in the Bible, in his word, God gives us a political plan for how the world's going to develop. What is going to happen. And it's probably not the plan you or I would have, but it is his plan, and we see this plan here in the Bible. And there are several places where God reveals his plan to us, and we're going to take a little bit of a prophetic look at some of that. But let's look and consider what I think is probably the best passage for a basic understanding of God's plan, and that's in Daniel chapter 2. The prophet Daniel chapter 2. Now Daniel, of course, was one of the exiles. He had been carried away into exile in Babylon as a young man because all of the rulers of Israel had their own plans of how they were going to run things. And God said, oh, I don't think so. You check it out. You can read the whole history. We're not going to go through the whole history of Israel tonight. But you can read it. The rulers and kings all had their plans of how they were going to run things. And God said, don't you do it. Because if you do not do what I say, this is what's going to happen. You're going to go into exile. And they didn't do what God said. And they went into exile. And Daniel was one of those people who got carried off into exile and landed in the palace in Babylon. And so he was there with his friends. And this is what happens in Daniel chapter 2 in that passage. It says, in the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams that troubled him. Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylon. And sleep deserted him. So the king gave orders to summon the diviner priests, the mediums, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. When they came and stood before the king, he said to them, I've had a dream and I'm anxious to understand it. The Chaldeans spoke to the king, may the king live forever. It's a good opening line with the king, right? Okay. Tell your servant the dream and we will give you the interpretation. The king replied to the Chaldeans, my word is final. If you don't tell me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a garbage dump. But if you make the dream and its interpretation known to me, you'll receive gifts and a reward and great honor from me. So make the dream and its interpretation known to me. They answered a second time, may the king tell his dream to his servants, and we will give the interpretation. The king replied, I know for certain you're trying to gain some time, because you see that my word is final. If you don't tell me the dream, there is one decree for you. You have conspired to tell me something false or fraudulent until the situation changes. Nebuchadnezzar was used deal with politicians. Just understand that. Okay. So tell me the dream, and I will know. You can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king, no one on earth can make known what the king requests. Consequently, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked anything like this from any diviner, priest, medium, or Chaldean. And the king is asked, what the king is asking is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals. Because of this, the king became violently angry and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. The decree was issued that the wise men were to be executed, and they searched for Daniel and his friends to execute them. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar is a very powerful guy. He's a politician. He's a king. He is risen to power. He has conquered the world as it was known in his day. He's the most powerful man on earth. And he had plans for how he's going to do things. Now don't sell Nebuchadnezzar short. He was a smart guy. I mean, he had outdone everyone. He had beaten everyone. He ruled the world. But God enlightened Nebuchadnezzar of his plan. Nebuchadnezzar had it all in line. He had everything. He had ruled the palace. He had the armies. He had the land. He had the slaves. Everything was his. Some of the ancient wonders of the world, you can hear about the hanging gardens of Babylon. This was under his rule. He controlled all of it. And yet God sent him a dream to where he couldn't sleep. Why? Because God showed him his plan. Nebuchadnezzar may have had his plans for how the world was going to go, but God had a different plan. And God showed Nebuchadnezzar in his dream what was going to happen and what God was planning for the world, and it troubled Nebuchadnezzar greatly. Nebuchadnezzar was very upset by his dream, and he wanted to know what it meant. But he was surrounded by government workers, his cabinet. And so he knew that if he told them the dream, they'd make something up. It's an interesting thing, because Nebuchadnezzar's the only guy that pulls this. Everybody else who needs a dream interpreter, they always tell the dream. You know, then you go back to Joseph, you can go to other stories in the Bible, they tell what the dream was, and then they get the interpretation. Nebuchadnezzar, he was not a trusting soul. He wasn't trusting these guys. He knew them too well. He wasn't trusting them to give him an interpretation. They'd make something up. So he said, no, if you really have the interpretation, you'll tell me what the dream was too. And if you don't, we're going to tear you to pieces. He knew how to motivate and influence people. That's why he was king. I mean, he knew how to motivate. He must have read that book on winning friends and motivating and influencing. And so here he is, and he doesn't want just any old explanation. He wants the truth. He knows he's had a dream. He knows it's a divine origin. He knows there's something different about it, and he wants to know what it meant. And this sets up a really bad situation for Daniel and our heroes in this book, because they are among these wise men of Babylon. Now, they're not the chief rulers yet. They're still youngsters. They're in the court. And the way Nebuchadnezzar did it is he took the smartest and brightest people of every country he conquered, and he took them off to his palace, and he made them work for him. That's the way he ran things. And that way he had the smartest and brightest and best from every country on earth. Because whenever he conquered them, he took whoever was the best and he put them to work. Nebuchadnezzar worked this way. And so this sets up this bad situation for Daniel and heroes here in this book, in that they're going to be executed for something they have no control over, because of the political whim of the king, who says, I want to know this dream, and if you can't tell me, I'm off with all your heads. And he'll just replace them all, which he could. And that's where they're at. But this also sets up the perfect situation for Daniel's rise to power. Why? Because God's the one in control. Because God's the one behind the scenes, pulling the strings. God's the one who sent this dream to King Nebuchadnezzar. God's the one who's able to give the interpretation. And even all these other guys, these sorcerers, these wise men of Babylon are saying, no one can do this. It would take a God to do this. We can't answer this question. We can't tell you what you dreamed in the middle of the night. You're not going to tell us what it was. So look what happens. Verse 14 says that Daniel responded with tact and discretion. That's how you always respond when you're about to be executed, right? They're about hauling you off to be killed. If you respond with tact and discretion. Okay, well, Daniel did. Tact and discretion to Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, who had gone out to execute the wise men of Babylon. He asked Arioch, the king's officer, why is the decree from the king so harsh? Then Arioch explained the situation to Daniel. Good point there. Always make sure you know what's really going on. Okay, Daniel got his facts straight first. Verse 16. So Daniel went and asked the king to give him some time so that he could give the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went into his house and told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah about the matter, urging them to ask God, the God of heaven, for mercy concerning this mystery, so Daniel and his friends would not be killed with the rest of Babylon's wise men. The mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision in the night, and Daniel praised the God of heaven and declared, "May the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. He changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. I offer thanks and praise to you, God of my fathers, because you have given me wisdom and power, and now you have let me know what you have asked, what we have asked of you, and for you have let us know the king's mystery." Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had assigned to destroy the wise men of Babylon, and he came and said to him, "Don't kill the wise men of Babylon. Bring me before the king, and I will give him the interpretation." What seemed like an impossible problem, what was, by all human standards, an impossible problem, turned into a great opportunity for God's people. It turned into the vehicle God was going to use for his plan. Nebuchadnezzar had his political agenda, but God was making it clear to him and the whole world that God had a different agenda. And God revealed this agenda to Daniel so that he could respond and go in and explain it to Nebuchadnezzar and through the prayers of his people. And let's go ahead and we'll look at the explanation of Daniel gives, and then we'll come back and talk about that prayer. Look at verse 25. It says, "Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said to him," which, by the way, Nebuchadnezzar was not a patient man, in case you haven't picked up on that. Okay, when you're dealing with the king, you do quick, okay. "I have found a man among the Judean exiles who can let you know the interpretation." Notice Arioch gets his plug in for his, "I found him, your majesty." Okay. Verse 26. "The king said in reply to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, 'Are you able to tell me the dream I had and its interpretation?' Daniel answered the king, 'No wise man, medium, diviner, priest, or astrologer is able to make known to the king the mystery he asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has let the King Nebuchadnezzar, know what will happen in the last days. Your dream and the visions that came into your mind as you lay in the bed were these. Your majesty, while you were in your bed," he's going to tell him the dream, that's what Nebuchadnezzar asked for. "While you were in your bed, your thoughts came to your mind about what will happen in the future. The revealer of mysteries has let you know what will happen. As for me, the mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but in order that the interpretation might be made known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. My king, as you were watching, a colossal statue appeared. The statue, tall and dazzling, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was terrifying. The head of the statue was pure gold. Its chest and arms were silver. Its stomach and thighs were bronze. Its legs were iron, and its feet partly iron and partly fired clay. As you were watching, a stone broke off without a hand touching it, and struck the statue on its feet of iron and fired clay, and crushed them. And then the iron and the fired clay and the bronze, the silver and the gold were shattered and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, and not a trace was left of them could be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. the king its interpretation. Your Majesty, you are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and glory. Wherever people live, or wild animals, or birds of the air, he has handed them over to you and made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. Imagine Nebuchadnezzar's happy up to this point, right? Okay. Verse 39. After you there will arise another kingdom inferior to yours, and then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over the whole earth. And a fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron. For iron crushes and shatters everything, and like iron that smashes, it will crush and smash all the others. And you saw the feet and toes, partly of a potter's fired clay, and partly of iron, and it will be a divided kingdom, though some of the strength of iron will be in it. You saw the iron mixed with clay, and the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. And part of the kingdom will be strong, and part will be brittle. You saw the iron mixed with clay, and the peoples will mix with one another, but will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with fire and clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. And this kingdom will not be left to another people. It will crush all of the kingdoms and bring them to an end, but will itself endure forever. You saw a stone break off from the mountain without a hand touching it, and it crushed the iron, bronze, fired clay, silver, and gold. The great God has told the king what will happen in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is certain. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell down and paid homage to Daniel, and gave orders to present an offering of incense to him. And the king said to Daniel, your God is indeed the God of gods and Lord of kings, a revealer of mysteries, since you were able to reveal this mystery. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many generous gifts. And he made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon, the chief governor over the wise men of Babylon. And at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to manage the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained in the king's court. Now, that's an interesting passage. If you're a prophecy buff, then that's probably one of your favorite passages. If you're not too into biblical prophecy stuff, then it's probably kind of, this is interesting, but not your thing. But I'm going to tell you, God here in this passage, he showed Daniel and showed King Nebuchadnezzar his plan, his political plan for the world. And most of which, a good portion of which has already happened. It's history to us. It was not history in the time of Daniel. It was still prophecy. God's political plan for human history, for the world, has 6 major world empires, which we have seen. World empires that rule over all the rest. Now, there's been a lot of times in history where you have multiple empires that kind of battle one another. You know what I mean? Most of history has 2 or 3 superpowers that set off against one another. And that is probably what most of our life has been like. I mean, what we remember is there are these multiple powers. But there have been a few moments in history where there was really one dominating world power that controlled at least the Western world. And so we see this here in this passage. The first world empire that's represented here, and what Daniel tells us very clearly, is represented by the head of gold, is Babylon. It's King Nebuchadnezzar. He's the head of gold. It's his kingdom. He is ruling over Babylon, and he is ruling the world in his day. Everyone had been defeated in the world, the known world as they knew it. And so he was that first head. And you see in the Bible, and you can see in other parts of Daniel in particular, that the second empire comes up. In fact, Daniel survives the transition. Can you imagine, imagine World War II, okay? If you were in power in Germany, and the Americans and Russians came in and conquered, and they still left you in charge. Can you imagine such a situation? You were the guy in charge before, and you were the guy in charge. That's what happens with Daniel. And Germany's not your best example. But he's in charge in Babylon. The Persians come in and conquer, and Daniel's still in charge. That's what, what goes on with him. So we see that through the book of Daniel. You see that the represented by the silver in the arms was actually the kingdom of Persia under Cyrus the Great. Isaiah actually calls it by name 100 years before he was born and says he's going to come in and conquer and he's going to rule. But the Persian kingdom was not quite as strong as the Babylonian kingdom. It never had quite as solidified of a rule, but it was a very powerful kingdom. And so you do see that, and that would be the second, the part of silver, the chest and arms of silver that are represented here in this statue. Following that, you have a stomach and thigh of bronze, which historically we know was the nation of Greece. Alexander the Great comes in, he has a war of revenge against the Persians, and he whips up the floor with them. I mean, quite honestly. Alexander's an interesting character if ever you want to study him historically. But biblically, they knew, Daniel knew, he even predicts later in the book that it is Greece that's coming. Okay, these three we can call by name. The Fourth World Empire, which probably wouldn't surprise you if you have any concept of biblical history, with the legs of iron, would be Rome. Rome conquered them all. And Rome was a tough empire. They were a brutal empire. They shattered everything that had come before them. They ruled over all of it. And so to us, these things are historical fact. We already know that all of these existed. What's interesting in Daniel is he wrote this, and King Nebuchadnezzar's dream came before it happened. Before Persia, before Greece, before Rome, Daniel wrote down all these things were going to happen. And he lived to see some of it. And you can see those in other parts. I encourage you to read through the book of Daniel and you'll kind of see what I've been talking about. Now he continues on to a fifth world empire that's represented by feet of iron mixed with kind of clay, hardened baked clay, or we would probably call that pottery. If you look at what you see in the book of Revelation and what Paul tells us in Thessalonians, you would see that this would represent a fifth world empire, somewhat of a revised Roman Empire that would be the Antichrist system. And that's still future to come. The dream is not complete. God still has a political plan. The world is not at the end yet. There's still this future empire to come. The day will happen. But even that's not the end. See, that's not the end of the dream. That's not the end of the interpretation. Because the final world empire, the final kingdom that's represented here is not part of this statue. It's not part of something that was made. It is a stone that breaks off from the mountain without human hand. Daniel says it twice, without hands touching it. What is the stone that's not carved by human hands? That becomes the foundation of everything we know as Christ. We know that from the New Testament. And this stone comes and it strikes this statue on the feet and it destroys. It hits that last kingdom and it destroys all of it to the point that it shatters to where none of it's even remembered. And that kingdom, that final kingdom, that stone consumes the entire world to the point that it is the kingdom that lasts forever and ever. What Daniel was very clearly telling King Nebuchadnezzar is the day is coming. Well, the world may have all of its kingdoms, and God is going to allow it. There will be these political agendas. These political kingdoms will exist. It did exist. Babylon was real. Persia was real. Greece was real. Rome was real. But God had a plan through all of it, and his final plan was the kingdom of Christ come on earth. And that day's still coming. In fact, if you look at Philippians chapter 2, great passage, but it gives us something here to think about. Philippians chapter 2, beginning, let's pick up in verse 8. It says, he humbled himself, speaking of Christ, he humbled himself, becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. For this reason, God highly exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name, so that the name of Jesus every knee will bow, of those who are in heaven and on the earth and under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So I want to tell you, even here in the middle of our current political season, I know a lot of Christians are worried about what's going on and what they may like or what they may not like. But I'm going to tell you, compared to Daniel and his friends, we got it pretty easy. No. I mean, has an executive order been signed to have all of us executed today? No, it has not. Okay? Compared to Daniel and his friends, we've got it a little bit easy here. We may be facing a hard time, but we're not facing what he faced. And you know what? Even in what he faced, God was in control. God was on his throne, and God had a political agenda, and God's final agenda and God's final word is that his kingdom is going to reign. All of the kingdoms of this world may come and go. And there have been many, 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 many kingdoms down through history. Many rulers, good and bad. But guess what? At the end of the day, it's Christ Jesus who reigns. At the end of the day, every knee will bow. At the end of the day, at the end of this world, his kingdom will be established and it will reign forever. That is what God's word tells us. Now you might say, in the middle of this, what is a Christian to do? What should we do in light of this information? I'm going to tell you the first thing a Christian should do is don't worry. Instead, pray. Don't worry. Instead, you should pray. Look again at Daniel chapter 2, verse 17. It says that Daniel went to the house and told his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah about the matter. He went and said, guys, the king has just ordered we be executed. I bet they took that really well. Right? Look, verse 18 says, urging them. I bet he was urging them really strong. Urging them to ask God, the God of heaven, for mercy concerning this mystery, so Daniel and his friends would not be killed with the rest of Babylon's wise men. What did Daniel and his friends do? They prayed. If you're worried about things, take it to God. He's in control. Take it in prayer. Don't sit there worrying about it. Pray about it. Ask God for his guidance. Ask God for his wisdom. Ask God for his intervention. And that's where Daniel and his company, where they were. They were troubled by what happened, so they prayed and they asked God, and God answered. So you feel like you're in a bad situation. You don't turn on the news for a few minutes, you will. Don't worry about it. Pray about it. Pray about it. When you don't like the way things are, and maybe you feel like the world is hopeless, maybe you feel like all our good choices are gone, don't try and solve the problem one problem. You won't. When Nebuchadnezzar brought this dream to the wise men of Babylon, could they solve his problem? No. What did it take? It took God's people praying. It took God's people going to God and God intervening. I'm going to tell you, we will not solve the world's problems. Not going to happen. Until Jesus comes back. What we can do is we can take anything that we do face and pray and take it to God and let him deal with it. And trust him to deal with it. Daniel did. And that is what we should do. We should trust God. We should take it to him and trust him for an answer. And you might ask, well, what else can a Christian do? I'll tell you, well, you need to remember God is the one in control. God's in control. God did not step off his throne. He's still there. He's in control. In fact, listen again to Daniel's prayer in Daniel chapter 2, verse 19. It said, the mystery was revealed to Daniel at night, and Daniel praised the God of heaven and declared, may the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. Who establishes kings? God does. Who removes them? God does. Who is in control of this world? Ultimately, God is. And I'm going to tell you, whatever happens on this earth, the ultimate end of it will be God's plan fulfilled, the kingdom of Christ on earth. He may not get there the way I plan, but I guarantee you God will get there the way he plans. He's in control. So remember that he's the one there. And I'll tell you, personally, I don't think I would have voted for King Nebuchadnezzar. I don't think so. I don't think I like the guy. Not sure I would have voted for Alexander the Great either. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have voted for Julius Caesar. But you know what? God used every last one of them for his purpose. I might have voted for Cyrus. I do kind of like that. But that's a whole different story. King Cyrus actually has some good redeeming qualities. But we'll find out whether he's in heaven when we get there, right? But God had a plan to accomplish his plan on earth. And we need to remember that at the end of the day, it's God who's in control, and he will accomplish his plan. And You might ask, what else can a Christian do? What can a Christian do? Well, I'm going to tell you, you ought to keep focused on the positive. Don't focus on the negative. Now, in the world today, you can hear a lot of negative. A lot of bad mouthing, a lot of trash talking. That could be the world of politics or the world of sports, whichever you want. Focus on the positive. See, Daniel didn't lose his head. Instead, he focused on what God could and would do. And we are told this. This is in Philippians chapter 4. Look at verse 6. Don't worry about anything. Anybody worried today? Paul says, don't worry about anything, but in everything through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Paul's following the same line as Daniel here. Verse 7. And the peace of God, which surpasses every thought, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any moral excellence, if there is any praise, if there is any praise, dwell on these things. Do what you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. You know, we are in a very highly charged political season. Don't let it discourage you. Don't focus on the negative. Focus on the positive. That is what we are commanded in Scripture to do. We are to focus on what is good, what is true, what is lovely, what is pure, which means probably I can't watch a lot of political speeches. But still, I mean, we're supposed to focus on the positive, not the negative. And I want to tell you, if you focus on the negative, it will bring you down. If you focus on what is true, what is honorable, what is just, you will have God's peace working in you. If you take everything to Him, not to yourself, not to go out and solve it yourself, not to the wise men of this world, but you take it to Him in prayer, Paul says we'll have God's peace. Which one do you want, worry or peace? Your choice. Well, we're told not to worry. We're told to focus on the positive, not the negative. You might ask, well, what else can a Christian do? I'll give you one more thing. And that is what Jesus Himself said. He said, be salt and light. I know we looked at this a few weeks ago, but Matthew chapter 5, let's look at verse 13. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt should lose its taste, how can it be made salty? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled on by men. You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand, and it gives light to those who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Jesus didn't talk about a party or a person or a politician being the solution. He said, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light. Go out and shine. Go out and be salty. I know in Arizona it's not so hard to be salty, but go out and be salty. In Romans chapter 12, verse 21, Paul says this. He says, do not be conquered with evil by evil, but conquer evil with good. Don't let the evil of this world take over. You do what is good, what is right. And I'm going to tell you, if we focus on negative, it will corrupt us. But if we focus on the positive and do what is positive, do what is right, even when everything else in the world is going wrong, if we will do what is right, we will show Christ to the world. That's our calling. And the darker the world is, the more your light will stand out when you do what's right. When everyone else is running from the evil of the world, we need to move toward the darkness with the light by doing good. This is how we gain victory over the world. By being the light shining in the darkness. Let's pray.